You think you know what to expect, but you absolutely do not. Some of you might be asking what Christian fiction even is. Think along the lines of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia or even Lord of the Rings. However, both were so good that they broke out of the strictly Christian audiences, so many people don't realize that's where they came from. Well, okay, Narnia, yeah, but Tolkien specifically wrote his books to be more subversive, and he wanted it to be a standalone thing outside of being touted as Christian. Lewis was a bit more obvious, obviously, and the two argued about this a lot during their lifetimes. Anyway, the genre is largely overlooked because, well, who goes into a Christian bookstore to look for anything other than a Bible or a book written by a preacher? Who goes into Christian bookstores other than grandmothers? Well, when I was younger, my mother took me to them. I tagged along because I was a child, and also it was right by the mall, so why not just tag along? I get to go to the mall. One fateful day, I meandered around and found myself in a very small but riveting Christian fiction section, where I found a book called The Last Thing I Remember. The synopsis on the back was very vague, so I sat on the floor and read the first chapter. The book kicks off with main character Charlie West waking up and finding himself strapped to a chair in a torture room. He has no memory of how he got there. His last memory was falling asleep in his bed at home, having a normal life as a high school student. That was all the information I was given, but it was enough to make me beg my mother to buy this book and its sequel, The Long Way Home. Before I go any further, it's important to me that you know that on the back of the first book, it reads, Andrew Clevan, the author, I think that's how you say his last name, was hailed by Stephen King as, quote, the most original novelist of crime and suspense since Cornell Woolrich. Maybe he is a good writer, and he's just not good when writing from the perspective of a teenage boy. Or maybe the writing feels juvenile on purpose because it's coming from a teenage boy's brain. You tell me. No, really, tell me, because I genuinely don't know. Book 1, The Last Thing I Remember. So like I said before, wakes up in a torture room strapped to a chair and he's trying to figure out how he got there because the last thing he remembers was being at home. He was writing a history paper due. He could have stopped there, just said like, oh, I was writing a history paper, talking to my friends, but no, instead he spends like half the chapter going on and on about how his history teacher named Mr. Sherman is a radical teacher, very radical leftist, and really only wants them to write about how communism is the only good form of government, which good old American Charlie West here refuses to do and spends the chapter harping on it. Like, just a lot of time was spent on that subject alone when, like, it was not relevant at all to what was going on, and you don't need to know any of that. Like, it becomes kind of relevant later, but it's just a lot of strong patriotism thrown on you right from the beginning. Oh, and he's a black belt. It is important, but the way it's written into this book is, like, so crowbarred into there. It's, like, obvious the author is like, hey, he's a black belt, I need you to remember he's a black belt. He also describes his sister as, quote, emo to the extremo, and I hate that, but I also really deeply resonate with it. Now, before I read this, mind you, she is his older sister. Talking about his mom, she hurried off to deal with Amy before the poor child, his older sister, got so full of girlish anxiety that she exploded in a cloud of pink dust. Now, we don't have time to unpack all of that, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what 13-year-old me, who was a bright and budding emo at the time, was reading. I found it, of course, juvenile and awkward, but I was so hungry for the answer. I was so desperate to know how the story ended that I didn't care what I had to go through to get there. Basically, I can sum up this book series in one phrase. Excellent idea. Extremely poor execution. I've already spent this much time in the first few chapters of book 1 of 4, so I'm just gonna speed along and hit the bullet points. It's a Christian book, so of course no bad words allowed. These hardened terrorist assassins holding Charlie hostage call him the worst word you can say in this book. A punk. That's it, like the villains from a cheesy 50s movies, like, why I gotta, come here, you little punk. Just really shivers your timbers, doesn't it? So anyway, Charlie finds an escape route using his smart thinking and karate skills. So the next several chapters, he's just running through the forest and trying to remember his normal life, figure out how he got to where he is. One important flashback to the last night he remembers is a friend named Alex who had moved away a few years prior, and during that time his parents divorced and he became a bad boy. But he opens up to Charlie that night about everything. He also calls Charlie out for being narrow-minded and never having questioned anything he's ever been taught about God, America, or life in general. Charlie doesn't budge, of course, but this will be important for later. Anyway, Charlie survives the woods and gets picked up by a lady and is taken back to her house to, like, clean up and stuff. And it's there he sees a newspaper with the next year's date on it. So he realizes then that he doesn't remember a whole year of his life. Oh, and also, the police are after him too, because, and get this, at some point during that year, he escaped prison because he was tried and convicted of the murder of Alex. Anyway, he's being taken to the cruiser and he's surrounded by a crowd of reporters, so he doesn't see this person who comes up behind him and whispers in his ear, "You're a better man than you know, find Waterman." He feels a little pinch on his wrist, and once he's inside the car, he realizes that the person unlocked his handcuffs. Anyway, while he's in the car, he hears something on the radio that reminds him of something he heard in the compound that he woke up in, and connects some dots and basically figures out that the people who tried to kill him yesterday are going to try to kill the Secretary of Homeland Security. By the way, just a heads up, all of these books have a running theme of nationalism and fighting religious extremism, specifically the kind that brings terrorists from the Middle East. That's just what you need to know when it comes to who the real bad guys are. So during that transfer, his handcuffs are loose, Charlie gets free and runs away. He's homeless, finds himself sitting in a soup kitchen, and he thinks back to what Alex said to him about doubting everything, God, life, America. Charlie had never been through anything bad before, so now that he's actually going through something very serious, he's like, oh, I get it now. I can see how people question things. This would be a perfect setup for some solid character development, where Charlie is forced to confront what he's always believed and actually questions it and has to choose for himself what he believes is true and filter out anything that may not be true or hold on to things that are true. As a Christian myself, my faith grew stronger when I was finally forced to question things that I was taught my whole life growing up. Some things I still found to be true, some things I questioned further and decided that, you know what, I don't think I believe that. I don't think that lines up with other things that I find to be true. This being a Christian book would have been a perfect time for Charlie to go through this and be an example to the reader of how a healthy questioning journey looks like. Instead, he realizes that he's stronger than that. He's been training his whole life through karate, church, prayer, and school, so he doesn't doubt anything for a second. He doesn't need to. Basically just reinforcing the toxic yet all too common narrative in Christian culture that to doubt is to be weak. You wouldn't doubt if you just went to church more, if you just prayed more, if you just tried harder, if you just focus on the positive things. Moving on, he's walking down the street, he sees a woman getting assaulted, so he rescues her, and she's kind of out of it, mutters to herself about electricity and mind control, but she takes Charlie under her wing and brings him into her home, which is a room in an abandoned building. So this woman hoards newspapers, and Charlie sees on one a picture of the Secretary of Homeland Security next to a man who he suddenly recognizes, the man named Orton from the compound that he woke up in, connects the dots and figures out that that's the man who's gonna assassinate the Secretary of Homeland Security. Anyway, the book ends with him finding Orton, and Orton informs Charlie that they worked together. They both were a part of a group called the Homelanders, who are a national terrorist group. Basically, they are Americans who are helping the Middle Eastern terrorists because they can, move about freely and not be suspicious. And Charlie apparently was recruited into this during that year. He doesn't remember, but Charlie's like, no way, I would never. I love America more than myself. I turn into a bald eagle every full moon. So they fight. Orton's about to set off a bomb, but Charlie detonates it early so that it goes off before it can kill anyone, thus saving everyone. But now the police are after him again because now he's a national security threat. And that's the end. Book 2. The Long Way Home. We've moved to hardbacks now, so you know it's serious. So several weeks have gone by, and Charlie has a plan to clear his name. He's in a library when he realizes that he's surrounded by Homelanders. They've blocked off all the exits, but they're doing it in like a sneaky way so that they don't alert the people in the library. He finds a way to get one of the librarians to recognize him from all the wanted posters, because he's a convicted felon and also maybe a terrorist. She goes into a back room and calls the police, so by the time the Homelanders escort him out of the building, the cops are there, so the Homelanders ditch and Charlie's able to escape. Charlie has another flashback from his normal life. This time it's about his teacher, Mr. Sherman. Mr. Sherman is the one that had the audacity to question America's infallible goodness to him. So he and Charlie argued a lot. Mr. Sherman was outrageously rude to Charlie all the time. But then again, our author doesn't want us to like him, so you can definitely tell he's going way overboard with this character. Basically, all you need to know is that they had an argument. It makes Charlie angry. He goes to karate class, punches someone a little too hard, and then has to have a talk with his sensei, Mike. Before I explain this part, it's important to me that Sensei Mike, he did this in book 1, but I'm bringing it up now because he comes up a lot more now. He calls Charlie, or anyone really, a chucklehead. He says this more than Gatsby says old sport, one of the most famous catchphrases because it's one of the most famous pieces of American literature. He says it like every other sentence. It's exhausting. I hate it. What is a chucklehead? Even 13-year-old me hated this. I don't know who the target audience is, honestly. Very serious adult topics coming from a 17-year-old's narration with a vocabulary of a second grader. Anyway, Mike talks to Charlie about his conversation with Mr. Sherman about questioning beliefs and questioning things that he's always been taught. But again, instead of him learning anything, he just is reinforced in his mind that he is right and one of the good guys, and Mr. Sherman is wrong and one of the bad guys. So many opportunities for good lessons in this book wasted on this idiot. Talking about Charlie and the author here. Though this does make present day Charlie question if he's a good guy, because the police, who are, by the way, unequivocally the good guys in this book, I mean, heck, he escapes them 3 times, and by the 4th time, someone finally takes a shot at him. I have trouble believing that a convicted murderer and national security threat is never shot at once until the 4th time he escapes custody. Yes, he's white, but I still find that hard to believe. So he wrestles with this on his way back to his hometown to investigate Alex's murder, to try to clear his name. He goes into an abandoned mansion that he knew about to camp out for a little while, and surprise, his friends are there. They've been waiting for him. They kind of figured out that's where he'd go. Oh, and also Beth, a girl he had a crush on, is there, but turns out she's his girlfriend. They dated during that year, but he has no memory. They fell in love. They said, "I love you." And he's like, "Girl, last thing I remember was I had a big fat crush on you. Oh my God." So Beth tells him about the trial of Alex's murder. The morning after Alex's death, Charlie went straight to the police because he was the last one to see Alex alive. So he wanted to give them all the information he had to try to solve this as quickly as possible. But also, apparently, Alex's last words were him whispering Charlie's name as he passed away. Oh my God. He spoke to the same detective that we read about in book 1. His name is Detective Rose, and he was able to convince the detective of his innocence. After a few months, though, evidence suddenly pops up against Charlie. He told Beth that they found a knife with his prints, that Alex's blood was on his shirt, and that there were eyewitnesses apparently seeing him do it. So the next day he's arrested. Oh, and Mr. Sherman apparently attended all of the trials and became close friends with Charlie during this time. Beth doesn't really know what they talked about, she just knows that they talked a lot. It's important. So one of Charlie's friends with a small earpiece and a secret camera sets off to question some of Alex's friends who had been with him before he had spoken to Charlie on his last night alive. They discover that the night of his death, he had actually had plans to meet with Sensei Mike, because he used to take karate but had stopped once he moved away, and of course pushed away all the good people out of his life because he was a bad boy. This was surprising to everyone. He would have no reason to meet with Sensei Mike. He cut him out of his life. So Charlie basically just kind of kicks his friends out. He's like, "For your own safety, I don't want you to get in trouble being associated with me right now. Go home, whatever." He goes out that night to see Sensei Mike. After speaking, Sensei Mike said he didn't know Alex was planning to come see him. There was no arranged meeting, but Mike had run into Alex once, like a few weeks earlier, and saw on a computer that Alex had in front of him a website about American history. And he could also tell something was wrong, something was bothering him, so he told Alex, like, "Hey, if you ever want to come by and talk, you can come talk to me." So apparently that's what Alex was planning on doing. Then of course Mike tells Charlie that he has to turn him into the police because it's too dangerous for him out on the streets, and also it was wrong of him to break out of prison. He should have relied on the appeals process or whatever. So the sensei and his black belt pupil fight. Charlie loses, of course, but he tries to reason with Mike. Mike believes Charlie was framed, so he says, "If I was framed, then it would have to have been someone on the inside, someone in the police force, because Charlie gave them his clothes the morning after everything had happened. Like, they'd had all of his stuff in their possession for months, and only now they're finding blood when it was tested in the first place. So either Charlie was guilty or someone within the police or detectives were planting evidence on him." Charlie, like, while he's saying this, is realizing it for himself, because he was just, pulling words out of his butt, but then he's like, oh wait, that actually seems plausible. So by sending him back into police custody, he's sending him into the hands of more people who want to harm him, so Mike lets him escape. So I mentioned earlier that Mike saw Alex looking at a website about American history, so Charlie investigates further and finds the website that Alex was on, and it's a site that listed, according to Charlie, all of the bad stuff America has ever done and none of the good, and apparently it's stuff taken out of context. But what's important to take away is that he found a quote on that site that was word for word something Mr. Sherman had once said in class. So he didn't know if Mr. Sherman had written that document that he was reading, or if he had been reading it and maybe was brainwashing Alex into believing all of this stuff about questioning America and religion. And like I said before, Mr. Sherman had apparently become close friends with Charlie during the trial, so did he somehow brainwash Charlie into hating America and causing him to join the terrorist group? Don't look at me like that. I didn't write this. I'm just telling you what's written. So Charlie and his friends, who are helping from a distance now, find a way to hack into Mr. Sherman's computer and spy on him, and discover that, shocker, He's a part of the Homelanders. But Mr. Sherman's not as dumb as he looks. He's got a few tricks up his sleeve. He is able to trace the tracking back to Charlie and finds him in the abandoned mansion. Charlie connects some more dots and gets Mr. Sherman to admit that he actually is the one who killed Alex, because that night after speaking with Charlie, Alex started to have some doubts about joining the group because Charlie had started to change his mind a little bit, but he already knew too much, so Mr. Sherman had to, to keep the secret safe. Mr. Sherman also admits that he was part of the whole system for framing Charlie, because the Homelanders believed if they could get this, all-American boy Charlie to believe the system is flawed and has failed him, then he can start to question things, and because he is known to blindly follow and believe whatever is told to him with great gusto and passion, he would be a great recruit for them. He would do anything they told him to do. Honestly, not that far off for Charlie's character, but I digress. I mean, apparently it worked because Charlie did join, but the leader never fully trusted him because he always worried he was a double agent. Aha, we got our answer. Charlie's like, oh, that makes more sense. I would be a double agent. I can live with that. I can live with me being a double agent trying to take down this organization from the inside. Mr. Sherman rambles on about destroying America because freedom is bad. That's literally it. I'm not even paraphrasing. That's what he says. It's just freedom is bad. That's their whole argument. Charlie gets the jump on him, but oh no, Mr. Sherman reveals that he's got some goons over at Beth's house, and if Mr. Sherman doesn't reply to a phone call in like the next 5 minutes, then they're gonna kill her. So Charlie can't like incapacitate him or anything. So he dips, hops in Sherman's car, gets to Beth's house. She was able to smack one of them over the head with an iron. And then Charlie tackles the second guy in time. But during the time that they were in her house, she had called the cops, so Charlie's gotta dip. It's time to continue his quest to find Waterman because he's solved Alex's murder. It's time to solve his life. It's the end of book 2. Book 3. The truth of the matter. It's finally November, and I forced my mom to take me back to that Christian bookstore so I can get my grubby little, now 14-year-old hands on this book. It's also late November in the book now. It's been about 2 months since Charlie woke up to this new life of his, and he's in New York in pursuit of Waterman. He finds him in an alley and then gets shot in the back with a tranquilizer. He gets transported to an underground bunker through the trunk of a car. But there, Waterman reveals that they're the good guys. They just want to make sure Charlie didn't actually turn on them. So they give him a serum that's supposed to give him his memory back. It's a very painful process. He like passes out, his whole body goes like rigid and like throws up and stuff. It's like very traumatic on his body, and it comes in waves, so he'll have waves of memories and then he'll wake up, be fine for a little bit, and then like a next day or something have another wave of a memory, just so you know. So his first memory is talking to the detective, everything that Beth told us already, so I'm not going to make you go through the next like several chapters of just being told what we already knew but from Charlie's perspective, which by the way gives us no new information, just like how he thought or felt during that time. And even then, not that much thoughts or feelings. He's like, no thoughts, head empty, except for karate and God and America. And then in one of his memories, he remembers that he gets a secret message on his computer from a man named Waterman to come meet him if he wants to know who actually killed Alex. This is before the trial. Memories stop there for now. Also, I just really want to point this out. It's not relevant to the story at all. But in chapter 7, he says, almost 10 hours had passed. It must be nearly morning now. Turn one page over. And at some point he says, how much time has passed, I wondered. How long had I been unconscious? 10 hours, my guy! You just... It's one page over. Like, if anything, that could have been on the same page of a Word document, because the font's, like, huge in the book. So, I mean, the book, like, looks real thick, but the font's big, so... doesn't really count. Also, we're in the 3rd book. The Hunger Games told a longer and more, not just interesting, but detailed story about multiple characters and rounded them out in 3 books. And this is the 3rd book, and only like a couple months have gone by. And we've learned like nothing new since this book. And even then, it's not that much that we've learned. Like, oh my god, I really dedicated 2 years of my life to this crap. Anyway, the Homelanders found the bunker that he was in, but Charlie's hid in a panic room so they can't find him, so they just plan to blow the place up in case someone's hiding in there. That way everyone just dies. Ruh-roh, what's G.I. Charlie gonna do now? Well, he's gonna pass out because a memory wave hits him. Basically, he just remembers that first night meeting with Waterman. Apparently Waterman showed him some like official government ID to show him that he was official. I don't know. He never says like what the ID said. I don't know what department Waterman works for. It could have been fake. So Waterman told him about the Homelanders and the plan to take them down, and this plan involved framing Charlie for murder, and then getting him into the organization because they knew Mr. Sherman was a part of it and knew Charlie had connections with him and that Mr. Sherman would try to brainwash him and use him. So Charlie is to infiltrate the Homelanders, sabotage their plans, and report back to Waterman. If they fail, they all die. However, if Charlie just himself fails and gets discovered, Waterman and Incorporated will claim they never knew him and just throw him under the bus in order to protect their thing they're doing. But also, apparently, what they're doing isn't exactly legal. But good old boy Charlie agreed to it, of course. I just want to read this word for word. If he failed, and I quote, "You'll be taken away from your family, your school, your friends, your girlfriend. They'll all believe you were convicted of murder. They'll believe you're a fugitive who's escaped from prison. If all goes wrong, we'll never admit we know you. We'll never tell anyone the truth. Everyone who loves you will go to his grave believing you betrayed your country." Charlie agrees to that, dude. Make it make sense. Charlie wakes up from the memory thing, escapes the panic room, finds Waterman dead. Uh-oh, now he only has one person in the whole world who knows about the whole mission, who can clear his name, but he doesn't remember who that person is yet. And of course he escapes the bomb and the Homelanders through wit and karate, and he also like an attack drone that he found the remote to, but that's all you need to know, basically. Charlie's wandering around the woods again when he gets hit with another memory. Mostly it's just memories of meeting with Waterman and then talking about one of the leaders of the Homelanders who's named Wayland, and you guessed it, he's Iranian, and he kills people because he hates America and freedom. Not that there aren't people who hate America and genuinely want to like destroy it and like kill everyone, because there are evil people in the world, I'm not saying that. But like, geez, this is at most a young adult novel, but written for like second graders. I'm being pumped full of post 9/11 nationalism at the ripe old age of 14. Like, I think it's fine to be proud of where you come from to a degree. I mean, America, though very broken, still has potential. I wouldn't fight for change or anything if I believed it was unsalvageable. However, the blind patriotism that believes any opposition is just straight up a terrorist attack on the nation is absurd, to say the least. So many Christians, like this author, think of patriotism as like the 11th commandment, specifically about America, that like apparently God's up in heaven with like an American flag around his shoulders. No, could not be farther from the truth. We are not supposed to worship our country. If you're a Christian, your allegiance is to the kingdom of God, no kingdom on earth, but I digress. So he has more memory attacks and remembers that they implanted a device on his tooth so that he could activate that would erase his short-term memory in case he ever did get caught and was being tortured. That way it wouldn't kill him or anything, but it would erase any of his memories of working for the organization so they could keep the secret safe. And the second memory is who his last ally on Earth is, and it's Detective Rose. What? This man's been hunting him since book 1 and called him the worst thing someone can be. A punk? Wash your mouth out with soap, sir. Apparently he was the one to pick the lock on Charlie's handcuffs and whisper those words in his ear about finding Waterman. How Charlie didn't recognize the voice, I don't know. Anyway, the book ends with Charlie hiding in a cabin in the woods. The Homelanders find it and attack him, and then Detective Rose shows up and storms the place, and they arrest 2 out of 3 Homelanders. 1 got shot during the altercation. Charlie is arrested, but this time he knows that Rose is on his side. Ladies and gentlemen, the 4th and final book. The Final Hour. This book came out a year later in 2011. I was reading Shakespeare in school by now, and I dedicated my time to this juvenile series. It's not like waiting for the next Harry Potter book or anything. This was long suffering. I knew it was bad. I knew it was going to be bad. I just wanted to know how it ended. It was purely morbid curiosity. Maybe the author did something right, I guess, because I kept coming back like an addict. This book series ate up 2 years of my life, and it wasn't even good. So the book starts out with Charlie in prison. He's been there for about 2 weeks. Other prisoners have threatened to kill him, of course, so that's fun. Detective Rose just kind of like arrested him and dipped. Charlie's like beat up by prisoners and straight up abused by a guard. But then Rose finally shows up and is finally honest with Charlie. And I have to read this part verbatim because no summary could do it justice. This is coming from Charlie after his conversation with Detective Rose. Let me see if I've got this right. Most of the Homelanders are in custody, but the government doesn't want to admit that they were a highly funded organization taken down by an unofficial undercover organization. Because of their negotiations in the Middle East, it's more convenient to pretend the whole thing is over and to keep me here, with everyone thinking I'm a murderer. Meanwhile, Prince escaped and wants me dead, but you have no way to find him because the government prefers to believe he's gone and you have no power base. So not only am I stuck in this hellhole, I'm a sitting duck for anyone who wants to earn Prince's favor by bumping me off. Have I got all that right? Well, yes, he got it right. So basically, the whole side operation wasn't legal, and the government wants to maintain its good standing with oil companies with human lives at stake, of course. All of this government corruption doesn't seem to shake our all-American boy Charlie. He doesn't seem to question anything. It upsets him, but doesn't make him question anything at all. Like, hello? It's not just about you anymore, buckaroo. Anyway, Rose tells him that he'll get him out through the appeals process, get the charges overturned, and Charlie should be home in a few months, but that's the best he can do. So a lot of stuff happens that's not super important. It's just interactions with inmates that are repetitive stuff of like, you know, Charlie gets beat up, but he like karates his way out of it, or like has conversations or whatever. Finally, Charlie has a memory of the night he got caught as a double agent. And right before he was caught, he remembers hearing plans of a terrorist attack on New Year's Eve. Prince, the leader, said he only needed a few men to carry it out, or if anything, he alone could carry it out. Well, you know, Prince and a couple guys have escaped, and New Year's is less than 2 weeks away. So of course Charlie tries to tell the warden, but doesn't believe him, and he can't get in contact with Rose anymore. He's the only one that knows about the attack, so he has to stop it, and he joins a group of prisoners who are already conveniently planning an escape. 2 issues with this plan though. 1, they won't be able to break out until December 30th. That only gives Charlie 1 day to track down Prince and stop whatever plan he has. And 2, part of their plan is to kill a guard. Specifically, that Charlie has to kill a guard in order to prove that he's really with them, you know, he's really ready to bump elbows with these guys. In the meantime, Charlie's able to talk to Sensei Mike, who is, by the way, a veteran, so he has connections in the military and hopefully get some of his guys on it. And because of this, he also is able to figure out Charlie's, like, whole deal for the most part, so he believes Charlie when he tells him all this. He's able to tell Mike to find Detective Rose for him and tries to give him a hint about the fact that he will be escaping and where he'll be when he escapes. So, back to escaping. I'll make this quick. So, of course, Charlie doesn't kill the guard. He just cuts his own arm, smears blood on the guy's neck, and as a form of intimidation, calls him a chucklehead. Tells him to play dead so that he won't actually get dead. He also is able to tip off that guard about the plans because, by the way, the guys he's escaping with are literal Nazis, and he doesn't want them, you know, free on the streets. So he's like, hey, we're escaping, this is where we're gonna go, please arrest them, oh my god. They escape through an underground sewage system and find themselves in an abandoned mall. The cops get there, but Charlie's already out the door. Charlie gets chased down by a Jeep, but once it catches up to him, it's actually Sensei Mike, and he's like, get in, chucklehead. Because Mike got wind of the escape thanks to Detective Rose, who is now back on their side. He shows up, he's got a small plane, and now they're on their way to New York to stop everything. I'm so tired. They figure out the weapon the Homelanders are going to use is a canister of gas that, when unleashed, will spread 4 blocks and kill everyone in a 4-block radius. They're going to do this on New Year's Eve in New York, so that's about 1 million people. And then apparently there's actually one fraction of a memory that Charlie can't quite unlock. It was that last night he remembers seeing a laptop, but he can't remember what it was he saw on it. So they're desperate for information, and they decide to give him more of the truth serum to see if it'll unlock it. Here's the catch, though. It could potentially kill him. But Charlie agrees, of course. Okay, I've been filming for hours, my camera died, so everything's moved, lights different, I'm wearing this, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I just want this to be over. So Charlie remembers exactly what he needed to, the information from the laptop. The attack is going to take place through the subway system under New York. They're in a plane closing in on Manhattan when the Homelanders show up in a chopper next to them, start shooting them. They kill the pilot, so Charlie, who apparently also had a little bit of pilot training in the past, because I forgot to mention he wants to join the Air Force. That was like mentioned in the earlier books, but it just wasn't relevant till now. So he's a little trained, but not much, so it's still a wild ride. They evade the chopper and it eventually crashes, and then their plane's on fire, so they have to make a crash landing. They survive. Rose's leg is all beat up, so Charlie and Mike have to, you know, do everything on their own. They make it underground, and then there's just multiple chapters of them running around through the underground system, fighting terrorists with karate and shooting and all that kind of stuff. All I need to know is Mike takes out the last 2 Homelanders using karate, but he gets shot in the process, so Charlie has to continue the journey on his own to take down the infamous leader, Prince. Karate Kid catches up to Prince and they duke it out while climbing a ladder under Times Square. Prince falls to his death. And that's it. The police finally catch up, and apparently Detective Rose was able to convince them to at least look into what was going on. So they found Charlie, found Prince, and were like, oh, okay, now we believe you. Detective Rose and Mike are alive and being treated, and Charlie is free at last, free at last. So basically 2 days later, he wakes up in a hospital. He gets a call from the president telling him that he will get Charlie into the Air Force Academy. The full story comes out, so people at least know that he didn't kill Alex. And also he was accused of killing Mr. Sherman, because Mr. Sherman died. I forgot to mention that. The Homelanders found him and killed him. But Charlie was accused of it. He didn't do it. Anyway, basically, the media's like, he's a hero. He saved the nation. Finally gets to see his family and friends and his girlfriend, Beth, in real life, not behind bars in the prison, and he hugs him and then lives happily ever after, the end. What do you think? Just so you know, every single one of these books at the very end has something called a reading group guide. So I don't know if these are meant to be like devotional books that you read in Sunday school, because I know there ain't book clubs hosting these other than Christian book clubs maybe. And it's all like lessons to have learned from the book, even though the characters in the book learn no lessons. So we've been through a lot together. I'm gonna give you some of my thoughts. I'll keep it as brief as possible. No promises, you know me. So like I've mentioned multiple times, there's no character development. Everyone's very one-dimensional. This whole series goes by, it's what, a year and a half of his life, and he's the exact same person at the end that he is at the beginning. He's just like been roughed up a little bit and is a year older. He doesn't even show signs of like PTSD or being affected in any way by literally being tortured and hunted for a year and a half. He's just like, well, glad that's over. I'm so happy to be a free American and live happily ever after. I'm gonna go get me and my lady friend a soda pop. There's so many things to change, but just the ending, just some things I could change about the ending to at least like push some kind of resolve in character development. Something like if Sensei Mike had died, the man who's been his mentor his whole life of teaching him right from wrong and teaching him to be a black belt, but just someone he relied on so heavily, to lose a character like that would really impact him, and then it's like truly him having to grow up and stand on his own 2 feet, something like that. But no, of course, nothing truly bad can happen in these books. No good people can die, of course. Bad things don't happen to good people as long as you believe enough, you try hard enough, you go to church enough, and you love America. You're fine. Well, Waterman died, but also Waterman was a little shady anyway. Waterman's death didn't affect him at all. Like, he saw the man's dead body, and like nothing. He even saw at one point a man get shot in front of him and like and die. Like, doesn't affect him at all. He's just like, yikes, and then runs. I mean, even just imagine at the end, if everything stayed the same, but instead of like getting a freaking call from the president to go join the Air Force, which he was originally going to do in the first place, and he had like a good track record, good grades, whatever, like he would have made it anyway. He didn't have to go through all of this to get into the, like, that was going to happen anyway. So now it's like he lost this year and a half of his life to like horrible stuff, and then is just like exactly where he would have been had he never done that. That's not how you end a book. Oh my god. Like, this is basically the same thing as he woke up and it was all a dream. It might as well. Might as well. Because it affects nothing. He's a year older and that's it. He's just maybe 1 year behind on his original plans. Even then, he's on a year behind because he still dated a girl during that time. He just didn't remember it. So he's really only a few months behind on his original plans for the rest of his life. Like, nothing. Ooh. But anyway, what if at the end he was like, you know, I kind of got screwed over by my own government. The very government that I dedicated my entire life, but also specifically was willing to die for and like be accused of treason and murder in order to save it. This very government screwed me over for some oil. Here's his chance to fight for change using his own personal experience. Here's his chance to open his eyes just a little bit to be like, there's a lot of flaws. And instead of just being like, well, those are those, but there's a lot of positives. And I'm just going to think about that and pretend the flaws, those are just out of context things. And we're not going to talk about it because America's still good. And so focusing on the flaws is not productive. No, here's a perfect example of how the flaws affected you personally and almost killed you, ruined your life. You either would have died or been in prison and been killed in prison because everyone in prison wanted to kill him apparently at the time. He could have been like, let me use this to maybe make some changes, get my experience out there, try to, I don't know, heck, even like run for some kind of office so that he can get up into this system the same way he did the Homelanders and try to like dismantle it from the inside. I don't know. Just do something to try to make the system better where something like that can't happen to anybody else. Instead, he's like, the past is the past. No need to worry about that now. Time to live my life as if nothing ever happened. Like, he saved America. He saved America. They don't even like give him a parade or anything or just any reward other than, hey, you were gonna do this, so you can still do it, here you go. That's basically it. He didn't win anything by getting accepted into the Air Force Academy. He would have gotten accepted anyway. Hey, we heard you wanted to do this, so go do it. Thanks for your service. I'm really getting the feeling of like, there is no war in Ba Sing Se. This book series really honestly haunts me to this day. It pops into my brain at least once a week. Like, I didn't really remember any of the details of it. I just remembered, like, boy wakes up with no memory in torture chamber. It's absolutely haunted me for a decade. So, like, I mean, the idea is fascinating. Like, I like the idea. I wish someone like Suzanne Collins got their hands on it, or even, I forget the author of The Maze Runner off the top of my head, but they had a similar idea of forgetting your life, but, like, they did it in such a better, I mean, basically, this is just like, hey mom, I want the Maze Runner. We have the Maze Runner at home. That's basically it. I just made that connection just now. Oh my god. When was the Maze Runner released? Is this just a ripoff? Is this just a weird Christian ripoff? Hold on. This was published the exact same year as the Maze Runner. So he couldn't have copied it. He couldn't have copied it unless they happened to be friends. How did they both have the same idea of, like, for not having your memory, but, like, you can get your memory back, but you're, like, in some covert operation to save the world, but you don't remember it, so you don't know if you're a good guy. Hold on, I'm having a moment here, live and in color. If you want to read a super heavy nationalistic Maze Runner series, but Christian, here you go. Basically, that's the video. I just wanted to share that with you because I feel like I'm the only person in the world who's read these books. I've never met anyone who's heard of them, read them. I don't bring it up a lot, but I just feel like I'm the only one who went through this at that age specifically too. And I know it was a long video, but, like, I needed to do it justice for myself. This video was for me. I'm being selfish. Part of me wants to say I'm sorry, but the other part of me is like, no. 2 years of my life were sucked up by these books. You only had to sit through this one video, and I condensed it down a lot. So you're welcome. Thank you for watching. 1 like equals 1 more person calling Charlie a stupid punk. Please subscribe below to give 13, 14, and 15-year-old me the justice they deserve from these books. Remember, everything's linked down below. I stream on Twitch most nights, and I also started a stream earlier in the day. I'm still kind of pegging down what day it is. I did it on Saturday for people who live in different time zones, but I stream on Twitch if you want to catch that. I play Animal Crossing and Zelda, and hopefully some other games soon. Also, Patreon down below. They get videos early and some exclusive content, and a Discord where I get to chat with everyone and make friends and whatever. It's just fun. I like watching Discord and being on there and chatting with everybody. Of course, my social media is always linked down below, but everyone always ignores it, so here it is on the screen, you lazy bums. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.